Wow, look at that number.
Yeah, we're getting some people joining us today, so we're just gonna let a few more come in and then I will start. Welcome to everybody who has joined. We're just gonna let a few more people come in and then we're going to start. All right. So thank you and welcome and thank you for joining OARC's webinar today. My name is Melissa Matheson and I'm the Education and Home Support Manager at Ontario Association of Residents Councils. This week, May 1st to the 7th, marks the 72nd Annual Mental Health Week in Canada, and the theme this year is #MyStory. So today, I am joined by some of our OARC resident experts, advisors, and leaders, also known as the Real Group, and Jennifer Blaik, who is a Psychogeriatric Resource Consultant with York Region, and we'll be having a conversation about resident mental health. You'll hear Jennifer speak about what is mental health and hear resident stories around mental health. Storytelling helps us build connections, strong communities, and really in all its forms supports mental health and reduces stigma. Some of the topics today, they might trigger you, and it is normal to feel unsettled around some of these topics. You might have a response physically or emotionally. We recognize this and want you to know that if you experience any triggers throughout this webinar, to reach out to one of your team members, a family member, or a friend to talk through what you've heard and how you are feeling. Also, our conversation today is not medical advice, so please reach out to your healthcare team and physicians for any medical advice or diagnosis. You know, the journey of mental health really starts with asking for help. And today I'm going to read our land acknowledgement. Together, let us now pause as we acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today, from wherever we are virtually participating in today's meeting. Let us take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land we each call home. We do this to affirm our commitment and responsibility to improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. We acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people who call this nation home. Let us now join in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how each of us, in our own way, can move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So some webinar housekeeping. Our chat box is disabled during this session, but you can type in questions into the question and answer box. And a response will be posted during the webinar, or it will be asked to the panel after or during this presentation. We will try to get to them all, but we did receive a lot of great questions prior to the webinar, and each of those topics could really have had its own webinar, to be honest. We've tried to weave into the presentation some of those answers to the questions that you have asked. So please know this is being recorded, and a recorded version of the webinar is going to be available on the OARC's website and emailed to those who've registered with their emails. And after the webinar, a pop-up screen will appear with a survey. We do ask that you complete the survey as it really does help us with future webinars and education resource materials that we create. So just so you know, your feedback is read and it is very valuable to us in what we do. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter and panel of Ontario Association of Residents Council's resident expert advisor and leaders, also known as the Real Group, who will be sharing their lived experiences. We have Devorah Greenspan, who is a resident leader in her home here in Toronto, Ontario, and she sits on OARC's Real Group as a co-chair. David Stanyan is a resident leader in his home in Toronto, and he is a member of OARC's Real Group. And we also have Gail Ramsden, who is a leader in her home in Ottawa. She sits on OARC's Board of Directors and is a co-chair of OARC's Real Group. And our presenter today is Jennifer Blaik, who I mentioned earlier, who is a Psychogeriatric Resource Consultant working in York Region. And she sits on our OARC Board of Directors and has worked closely with our REAL Group as a former board chair on the REAL Group. So Jennifer, if you could go more in depth with your role and how it relates to long-term care, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Great. Thank you for the introduction and welcome everyone today. Thank you for your interest in this important conversation. So my name is Jennifer Blaik. I am a PRC, or a Psychogeriatric Resource Consultant. And so what I do is I provide outreach to long-term care homes, different community support agencies. In my role, I support frontline staff in the long-term care homes, serving clients with responsive behaviors related to dementia, mental health, and other psychogeriatric related diagnosis. So I do staff education, case consultation, and we do a lot of capacity building and network building as well. Also, I do sit on the board of directors, and I also am a mental health first aid older adult instructor. Okay, so our time together today, we hope to touch on some of these areas. We're going to talk a little bit about what mental health is and what are mental health problems. We're going to talk a lot about stigma and then looking at mental health and long-term care. Today, we're going to really look at depression and anxiety as the two most common mental health problems that we do see in long-term care. We'll talk about some positive treatment outcomes, and then we're really going to look at what we can do as far as our own self-care. And then we will also look at some wellness supports and some different strategies that you will be able to take away today. So let's start off by talking about what is mental health. So mental health is a state of physical, mental, and social well-being, and it's not merely the absence of disease. So again, when we talk about mental health, we want to find that balance in all of those domains, the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual domains. And really, it is our ability to enjoy life and deal with everyday challenges, whether it involves making choices and decisions, and sometimes it's adapting and coping to difficult situations, or even sharing and talking about our own needs and our own desires. Next slide. Thank you. So we want to really make sure that we talk today about how we enjoy life and deal with some of those everyday challenges we may face. And we know that if you are struggling to maintain a positive mental health, please know that you're not alone and that help is available. And we will talk to you about some of the resources that we have available to you in your long-term care homes. So let's talk about what a mental health problem is. So it's not the same as just occasionally when we feel sad or when we feel blue or when we feel worried. A person living with a mental health problem will experience symptoms over a longer period of time where they are feeling low for that period of time. And it's really going to impact their ability to function in terms of getting out of bed, trying to maintain relationships, engaging in meaningful activities, doing any kind of self-care. So again, we want to distinguish the difference between a mental health problem and our own mental health. So a mental health problem is when you see a disturbance in your thoughts, your emotions, and it really is now a challenge to cope with everyday life. So like I said, you may see changes in your sleep, changes in your self-care, not wanting to get out of bed. You just feel like you don't have that energy to cope with everyday life. So that's when it becomes more of a mental health problem. So we'll talk about how we can support you through those mental health problems. So when we look at some Canadian stats, we do know that 1 in 3 Canadians will experience a mental health problem at some point in your life, whether it be anxiety, whether it be depression. Maybe when you were younger, you had some ADHD or some trouble with bulimia or eating disorders. So across Canada, we do see that mood and anxiety is about 11, almost 12%. So under that mood would be depression, bipolar, and other anxiety-related disorders. Substance use disorders, so alcohol, drugs, gambling, is almost about 6%. Cognitive impairment and dementia is about 2.1%, and then schizophrenia is about 0.6%. And so these are some Canadian stats. So these are some examples of mental health problems that we might see in long-term care. And like I said, today we're going to really just look at depression and anxiety, because those are the most common ones that we do see in long-term care. I know probably a lot of you have questions about dementia, and that really, we could do a whole forum or a whole webinar specifically on dementia, because I know there would be lots of questions. But I wanted to just introduce and talk about depression and anxiety today. But you could also see delirium, some, like I said, substance-related problems, post-traumatic stress, personality disorder, schizophrenia, and psychosis. So let's start by talking a little bit about stigma. So these pictures here, you can see in the first picture, it talks about the insane asylum and sending people away. And that really was what we used to do. We thought that that was the best way to deal with any mental health problems. So people felt that they had no control of their thoughts and emotions and behaviors. And so they were sent away to the asylum or sent to a mental institution. And I'm sure a lot of you have memories about movies or pictures that you've seen in books. But again, that is no longer what mental health supports look like and mental health support services look like now. The World Health Organization actually talks about stigma because of that understanding as a hidden burden of mental health problems. And that's a lot of times why people presently are still so uncomfortable about talking about a problem or saying that, oh, I might have depression, because they're afraid that they're going to be sent away and not able to have the care done in their own home. Stigma does add suffering, for sure. We see that it affects people's well-being. It affects people while they're in treatment, even as they're healing, and even as they have even recovered. We still see stigma around mental health. Often we do see it does, it does stop people from seeking treatment because they're embarrassed. They feel that it's a character flaw or that they're weak. And so often it's difficult enough to overcome, but often they say the stigma is more difficult than the illness itself. This stat here says 50% of our people living in long-term care are living with depression. So living with depression, but 50% of that number do not even receive help. So again, is it because that you don't understand what the signs or the symptoms may be? Or again, that you have trouble talking about depression?
Jen, maybe this is where, maybe Dave or Deborah or Gail, do you have any experiences or, experiences of stigma of mental health that you would like to share with us?
I wanted to just say that, within long-term care, things like dementia, Alzheimer's, even psychosis. These are things that are identified and are being addressed specifically within the long-term care setting. So there's, safe units or special units where behavioral problems are looked after with specialized care. So those things are all addressed within long-term care. But the things that are not addressed as readily within long-term care are these things that we're just speaking about. The depression and anxiety, where people might just feel like, oh, it's just something that I have to deal with. I can't pull my socks up and get on with my day kind of attitude, instead of recognizing that it truly is something that there are resources available. We just have to get over that stigma and ask for help.
A good point, Gail. And also in yourself, but also knowing sometimes, a family member or somebody else or a co-resident or somebody in your home might even say, oh, you're fine. You just need to get out to this activity and you need to be around more people, and dismissing it too, instead of actually addressing it.
Mel,
yes,
I found that stigmas are sort of pushed under the rug in families, because it's not nice to have something wrong with you. And I find that stigma starts when you're a child, because this is not long-term care, but definitely stigmas start when you're a child. Because when I taught special education, and my kids were always called names like dummies and stupid, and that stays with you even until you're an adult. When I was a kid, I was stigmatized by being called fatso. And to this day, I consider myself, I have that stigma. I feel that I'm fat. And I've carried this with me all my life.
Yeah, and
so
labels.
Really.
Yeah, Deborah, labels can really do that as well, and create
and also there's a stigma about living in long-term care.
Mm-hmm.
And I would definitely like to do something to eliminate that, because when people say to me, well, you have a condo, I say, no, I live in long-term care. And the faces afterwards and the comments are really very stigmatizing.
Yeah. Dave, I had seen earlier you were going to say something.
No, I just want to talk to the prevalence of depression. Those people who know me well, I use humor as my self-defense mechanism. I'm always the first one with a joke, and I play funny music, and I'm the class clown. And I take an antipsychotic drug every day, and I didn't think I had to, so I asked the doctor to stop it. And the minute they did, I got really depressed, and I shaved off my mustache for the first time in 50 years. And I immediately went back on it, and I'm fine now. Thank you very much. But it's there, and it's sometimes you can't even recognize it yourself. But 50% of people living in LTC are living with depression, if not more.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your story, Dave. And I think a lot of times we do see that oftentimes mental health gets talked about as an invisible health problem. When someone has a broken leg, you can see that they have a cast, and we know how to support them, and we know that they need physiotherapy and strengthening after they get their cast off. But a lot of times, people don't know how to reach out for that support, and don't always know how to ask for that help, or or feeling like Gail said, you know, oh, I should feel better by now. And so again, it's very tough. And we even see with mental health problems, people have trouble finding places to live because of that stigma, or participating in activities, or even having different relationships just because of the stigma around a mental health problem.
I'm on Zoom.
So when we address stigma, I just put together kind of a do's and don'ts list. I really think how we can work towards being more person-centered when we're thinking about stigma, putting the person first and not talking or referring to someone about their illness. You know, oh, the lady down the hall, she's so schizophrenic, or, oh, my neighbor, she's crazy. So putting the person first. So thinking about my neighbor that has depression, or my neighbor that has anxiety. Becoming informed about mental health problems. So coming and sharing resources like we have today, because jokes a lot of times and misinformation goes out. So, you know, I've heard so many people say, oh, I'm so OCD. I like things just so. Well, OCD is a mental health condition. And so for someone to hear that when you're joking about it, or you're not taking it seriously, it can be really harmful. Even saying things like, oh, I'm having a schizophrenic day, because your day's a little bit mixed up or full of confusion. Again, that's a really hurtful term to use. So trying to be more aware of the language that we use, and not letting those jokes go. I was telling the group this morning that we have a stigma jar on our workplace. And so every time we do hear someone use language or words that aren't person first or person centered, we put 10 cents in the jar. So even, like I said, using words like crazy, or, oh, she should go to the loony bin. You know, all of those words from the past, we want to try and change our way in how we speak about mental health. So speak up about stigma. So if you feel that the doctor or someone is not listening to you, you know, if you say, you know, I'm really feeling low, you know, I'm not sleeping well, my mood is really low, I'm not eating, and someone just says to you, oh, you'll feel better tomorrow. No, you know, you should follow through with that and ask for help. It's not something that you want to be embarrassed about. So talking more openly about mental health problems. So I applaud Dave and say thank you for sharing your story and being open about it. And it's okay. And you said, I feel better when I take these pills. And so again, that's the person that he wants to be. And he says, yes, I am taking this medication and it makes me feel better. So again, not being judgmental. So living in long-term care, we know that you may experience different loss. So the loss of your house, the loss of your partner, even the loss of a pet, the loss of independence. You may have some grief from moving, the loneliness from coming in because you're thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know anyone there. I'm moving away from my community. There is something that we call adjustment disorder, and that usually is when you're moving into long-term care. The first 6 to 8 weeks, you need to give yourself time to adjust to your new surroundings. You know, like I said, you might have a roommate. Maybe you've never eaten, you know, with such a large group of people. You've lived on your own. So adjustment disorder, like I said, might take 6 to 8 weeks for you to feel better. But if you're still having some of those signs or symptoms where you're feeling low and having some of those symptoms around change in appetite, change in sleep, again, it is something now that you might want to flag to say, this might now be depression. Okay. I know some of the residents did want to give some examples about loneliness and moving into long-term care.
And I know Deborah had her hand up earlier. Devorah, you're on mute right now. Oh, I think she's unmuting. There we go.
Okay, sorry about that. No, I just wanted to add to Jennifer's comments about when she mentioned if you have a broken arm, you get it fixed. Well, my daughter always uses that because I have a child that's had borderline disorder since she was, I guess, almost born. And she said to me, you know, Mom, she said, if people don't realize I'm sick inside because they can't see my illness, if I had a broken arm, they would see it and they would fix it. But what's going on inside of me, people can't see. So sometimes they just write it off.
Yeah, it's a good point, Devorah, for the stigma. If you can't see it, sometimes it's hard.
Yeah. It's really, I mean, I go through this with her, and she's a senior now, so I could throw her in the loop, into the pile rather. But really, she has suffered from that all her life, and she has a stigma attached. You know, she does, even within the family. They make comments, and it's hard to deal with.
It is hard to deal with that. And then when you compound that coming into long-term care and experiencing like the loss and the grief and the loneliness and the adjustment on top of what you've already experienced, that can be compounded for people. Devorah, you had shared earlier as well about your experience moving into long-term care. Did you want to share that, what that was like for you?
Okay, well, I went into long-term care after spending 6 weeks in the hospital. And I was told that I had to go into long-term care. And when they brought me in here on a gurney by ambulance, I was rolled in, and I looked around and I saw I was lying on a gurney. And everybody was walking around me. The comment was, "Oh, you made it," because I had supposedly had an admission 6 weeks before, but I had to stay in the hospital. So I lost the admission and the room, and they gave me another room. And I think going into long-term care had to be the most devastating experience of my life. I left everything behind, including my children and my grandchildren, whom I used to spend a lot of time with. And that broke my heart. Plus the fact that, gee, I was planning to have a nice retirement. What kind of life am I going to have in here? I mean, I don't want to be here. This is a terrible place. And there were a lot of things in here that upset me, like showers twice a week, having a roommate who was deaf and kept the radio with so loud that I couldn't concentrate on anything. I don't know. Oh, and then when I went into long-term care, I'm sorry, it was because I couldn't walk. And of course, not being able to walk and needing a hoist, you can't really live at home. And so when I came into long-term care, I could not walk. I got off the gurney from the hospital thinking I'm going to walk into my room, and I went plump on the floor. and they had to take me in a wheelchair. And I lived in a wheelchair for a year, being hoisted. But I did get some relief because I had surgery and lots of therapy. And thank God I can now walk around with a walker.
Thank you for sharing that, Deborah.
Oh, I left out some. Can I go back?
Absolutely, absolutely.
About the fact that I was really depressed, stayed in my room, didn't want to have anything to do with anybody. They questioned me. I told them to go away. And after I had my surgery and I started walking a little bit with the walker, I was really bored. And the program manager came over to me and said, you know, Deborah, she said, there are not enough people like you for me to warrant bringing in people to give you
like
sessions, things to do. So she said, I'm going to introduce you to these two ladies, Dee and Millie. And she said, they're connected with OARC. And she said, now that you're running council, I said, oh, I am? She said, yeah, you are. I said, oh, you've all told me, eh? She said, that's right. So because I was doing residence council, she introduced me to OARC. And I was invited to go to a meeting, and I joined OARC. And they are the most wonderful people. They're like my second family. They give me a purpose to live and do things for other people who can't do things for themselves. And I love them all.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you for sharing your experience, as well as how you've gone through that, the grief of loss and the adjustment period, and then also coming to finding a way in the home to find your purpose again. Gail, you had mentioned your experience as well. Did you want to speak to it?
Yep, sure. When I came into long-term care, it was as a result of a catastrophic physical challenge. And it meant I could no longer live at home. I was only 64 years old. I was not yet retired. And life in long-term care was, you know, maybe in my cards 30 years hence. Certainly not right now. So, you know, I went through a whole bunch of the same stuff that Deborah did, but I wanted to talk a little bit on a different kind of loss. For me, long-term care, the challenge was to find things for me to do, mental stimulation at the level that I was coming in, and like-minded people, people that I could have intelligent conversation with. And that's not that easy to find in long-term care, given the median age is, I think, 85, 87 years old, something like that. And they're not all as smart as a whip like Deborah is. So finding like-minded people was a huge challenge. And slowly I found a scant handful of people that I could have a conversation with. What happened to me, however, and I don't think it's unusual, given that the average stay in long-term care is, I think, 18 months. I lost 3 of those friends in a very short amount of time. And, you know, that was devastating for me all over again. And the sense of that loss and what it meant to me, to my well-being, was something that I had to stop and take stock of. and try to figure out how I was going to put some pieces back together and continue to move forward productively, because the alternative is to go into a depressed state, and that's no good for anybody. But it's I'm sharing it just to say that loss can happen at any time that you're in long-term care. Well, at any time period, but even any time that you're in long-term care, it's not just the loss of your independence and your home and your access to your family and those kinds of things. It can happen at any time for any reason. And sometimes it's really difficult to figure out how to put those pieces back together again. And it might just be one of those times that you have to reach out and ask someone for a little bit of help.
Thank you, Gail. Yeah, I think that's a very key point. Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Okay, next slide, please. So now we'll talk a little bit about depression. So again, like Gail said, there might be times where you are feeling that sadness or that grief, but it is different than a depressive disorder. So adults, you may feel blue, or you might have times where you're feeling down. But again, it's different than depression because you've been able to cope or recover without any treatment. So depression actually is an illness caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain, and it does affect our feelings, our behavior, and our physical health. And so I had said earlier that depression lasts for at least 2 weeks, where you're having those low moods, and it carries and impacts your activities of daily living, your personal relationships. And again, you may notice, or it might look like you're changing sleep patterns. Your interest or your activities that once brought you joy aren't bringing you that joy. You might have feelings of guilt or worthlessness. You may see a change in your energy, changes with your concentration, or some memory confusion and memory loss as well. Changes in appetite is a big flag as well. Maybe you're not wanting to eat, you're just not interested in eating, or sometimes we turn to comfort foods and you're looking to eat more. You may see changes in your psychomotor. So again, you're not feeling that you want to get up or that you want to get moving. It just seems all overwhelming that, oh my gosh, there's no way I can get down to the dining room. It's just too far. And there might even be with depression where you have some thoughts of suicide. What's the point of getting up today? No one's coming to see me, and having some of those thoughts. So it is important to remember that depression does affect all ages. And I said already that it's not the same as sadness, but I think it's really important to remember that it is treatable. We just have to recognize those symptoms. So we can look at best treatment options as far as combinations of different therapies that are available, and medication as well. But again, I really want to reinforce that there's no shame in seeking help, and that it's not a weakness or a character flaw that you are dealing with some of these symptoms. So let's move on to talking a little bit about anxiety. And so I think it's important for us all to remember that we do experience anxiety at some time. And so a lot of times we use terms like, oh, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling stressed, oh, I'm a little bit nervous, even sometimes words like frazzled or worried or tense. And so anxiety can be an unpleasant and an uncontrollable situation, but it's still normal. Anxiety is normal, even productive worry actually is helpful. So sometimes it is good for us to feel worry because sometimes it forces us to make decisions, to plan ahead. So a lot of times in long-term care, when talking to residents, they say that they worry about health, family, their finances, if they're going to develop a disability or their mobility, and then even talking about death as well. So these worries are more likely to arise in older adults when they feel that some of their physical abilities are diminishing and they're losing their independence. So we do know that rates are higher for older adults living in long-term care and retirement homes. Women actually are twice as likely to have anxiety. And we do see the percentage around 5 to 10% of older adults do have some anxiety. But again, it is treatable with supports and therapy. So what does anxiety look like? Well, like I said, we all have some experience of anxiety at some time, but this is when it becomes excessive worry. You're fearing impending danger. A lot of times we see a real concentration on fear of falling. So you don't want to have a shower because you're so consumed with the thoughts that you might fall and what might happen if I do fall. Trouble concentrating or focusing, sometimes racing thoughts, some trouble with sleep as well. And so, like I said, some of those examples could be, I remember working with a lady and she didn't want to go see her family anymore because she felt that the car ride was too long and she would have to stop and go to the washroom. And that was such a burden and that was causing her so much anxiety that she just stopped all her visits from leaving to go visit her family. And so again, it's when it's now consuming your day and impacting your activities of daily living and impacting your quality of life that you want to look at it as an anxiety disorder. So we do have, again, the professional supports around talking to your doctor, talking to different counselors and different therapies that are available. And then taking those steps will help lessen those worries and lessen those feelings. Okay, so some of the positive treatment outcomes, again, that we can talk about, like I said, improved quality of life, just thinking about our self-care. So thinking about things that we're able to do for ourselves that help us improve our quality of life. Improved emotional, social, and physical functioning as well. And then that will reduce that mortality rate if you aren't in that low place all of the time. So what can we do as far as self-care? So what does self-care look like? And I think that's the great thing about self-care because it can look like whatever you want it to be. It doesn't mean that, oh, I have to paint my nails or, you know, I want to have a bubble bath. That's not what self-care is. It's whatever it is to you. So I know one lady in long-term care, she said her self-care was knowing that she was paying her phone bill on time, knowing that she was taking care of writing in her journal and journaling for herself. It isn't selfish. I think that's really important to remember, and it's not an indulgence. So looking after yourself is especially important when things get tough and when you're struggling. So there's a great picture of Devora there. She's working out on her exercise machine, that for her could be her self-care. So doing a bit of exercise daily. So reading, maybe it's some spiritual support for you. So it's going to be different for each individual.
So let's ask, is there any other strategies that you might have done for yourself? Dave, do you have any strategies that you do for your self-care?
I'm learning to speak Spanish.
Ooh.
So,
Hola.
yo hablo español, pero no muy bien. Not very well. And I paint.
Yeah, your beautiful artwork behind you. So that's a wonderful self-care activity.
And I have online activities as well. I curate a Facebook page every day with, funny cat videos and things like that. Keeps me occupied.
Mm-hmm. I hear you talk all the time. You say you have a 10 o'clock meeting.
Yes, I feed the birds.
You feed the birds. That's getting out in nature and being with animals in nature is also very good self-care.
If it's sunny and it's 10 o'clock, you know where I'll be. So.
Gail or Devora, do you guys have any strategies that you use for self-care? I think Devora talks a lot about her physio and
she's on mute again.
And doing exercises. There she is.
Devora, what are some of the things that you like to do for your own self-care?
For my own self-care? Well, I like to go out with my daughter Saturdays.
Mm-hmm.
We do different things. I love to spend time with my family.
Mm-hmm.
It was very heartbreaking for me, and I'm just going to put this in during the pandemic because I didn't see my kids for almost 3 years. Mm-hmm. And that's really too long. That's really can cause big time depression when you can't see your kids.
Mm-hmm.
Because my family's kept me going all this time.
Absolutely.
They tell me how wonderful I am, so I can't do anything but continue living for them.
Aww. Definitely spending time with family is a good self-care act.
Yeah.
What about you, Gail?
But I also noticed you have in the strategies checking on your neighbors. Now I have, when I walk out of my room, I have residents sitting in wheelchairs all in 2 rows in the hall. And I do speak with them. And I have one lady that I have a special relationship with. And I really think she understands me. Because I'll tell her, I can't talk to you now. I have to go have a shower. And she'll do this to me. I don't know if you can see it. Or she'll give me her hand and we do, give me 5.
Yeah.
Or I pat her on the cheek. So I spend time with her and other residents as I go along. And when I walk through the home, which is everything is on 1 floor, which is really nice, I can get to all my peers and touch base.
Those are great examples of strategies to help your neighbors.
Mm-hmm. I'll give you an example. My grandmother lives in long-term care, and during the pandemic, like Devora said, we weren't able to visit, and she turned 100. We weren't able to have her party. She turned 101. We weren't able to have her party. So this year, in 2 weeks, we're having her 102nd birthday party. So we're excited to do that. So looking forward to that. And it was tough not to be able to visit and not to be able to spend that time with her, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So
my kids had I'm not that old. I'm 90. I had my 90th birthday. And my son made me a family party in Ottawa. So that's fun. Yeah. If you see, I miss, like I'm Jewish, so we have holidays. And I miss the family gathering for these holidays. And that really puts me into a depression, a short-term one, but a depression, because I can't join them. And I'm sitting all alone and there's nothing being done here because of the pandemic and after the pandemic. So we're finally going to be allowed to see our peers now. And and things are slowly going back to normal.
Well, Devora, that's a great segue into strategies to help others. You know, now that we are able to be together, so how can we help each other? And Jen's going to walk us through some strategies.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I know that was a big question is, you know, how do I help people that I'm living with, whether they're peers or just your neighbors? I think the biggest piece is listening without judgment. I think so many times we try to come up with a solution, or we try to come up with, you know, something like, oh, just try harder. You'll feel better if you get up for breakfast. Well, no, if you really have depression, that's really tough. And so just telling someone to pull up their socks and get moving around and you'll feel better. So listening without judgment. So sometimes you might have a neighbor or a peer or another resident that just wants to talk, and listening and just listening to their story. Like Melissa said, you know, stories are so powerful. And so sometimes they just want that listening ear. So checking in with neighbors, like Devora said, when she walks down the hall, she checks in with everyone. And a lot of that can be done through your resident council or through some of your social programs when you're checking in with each other, spending time together. So like Devora said, you know, our family, our friends are so important, and we're now getting that time back. And so that's really exciting. Sometimes just sitting beside someone, and whether it's just watching a movie or watching the TV, just having that person beside you sometimes makes things feel a bit better. Engaging in an activity that maybe your neighbor enjoys, that maybe is new to you. So, you know, Dave might have to start teaching painting at his home, or, you know, reading. I know there's one lady in one of our long-term care homes that just reads to people that have a vision impairment. And so she's reading books or reading stories and doing some storytelling with that. Or if you are able to play music, you know, playing the piano, maybe before dinner starts or something like that, and sharing in that music. The last point here, I would say, avoid arguing with your neighbor if they're really having times or struggles. Make sure that you ask someone else that can provide them with some help if you feel that they're struggling. Because again, sometimes with depression, you might be a little bit more irritable or a little bit more short. And so you might see some of those signs and symptoms in your neighbors. So don't diagnose them, but maybe just reach out to some of the staff members and say, maybe can you just check in on my neighbor? Okay. So other supports that may be available within your long-term care home, for sure, talking to your physician in your home is a really good first resource. Now, I know a lot of times they only come in once a week, but talking then to your nurse or your PSW to let them know if you are having some of those symptoms that we talked about today. Sharing with your family, you know, reaching out and saying, you know what, it's been a really hard few months. Like Gail gave that example. She went through some real loss, and that was really tough to lose some of those really good friends that she had just met. So sharing that, like I said, reaching out to your resident councils, and even maybe putting some wellness strategies on your wellness, on your resident council agenda, talking about how you do self-care. The social worker, if you do have one in your home, reaching out to them to ask for some other external supports. Talking about virtual connections, virtual counseling that's available, spiritual care that might be available in your home. Again, you know, just because you aren't able to get out, maybe to your church or your worship center, having them come in to speak to you and to visit. Therapeutic recreation services, so your programs department, so engaging with your activation or your program staff, and making suggestions about different activities that you're looking for, because again, they should be looking at the holistic piece and trying to provide services that meet your needs. The Java program, maybe Melissa can just talk a little bit about that program that's available.
Sure, we have a resident who actually on our Rio group who is involved with the Java program in his home. Residents pair up with another resident and they can create opportunities for peer support, similar to like what you said about reading to someone, having friendly visits, engaging activities. I think they have about 3 or 4 different types of programs that they offer, and it's really centered around peer support and engaging with one another in your home.
Mm-hmm. So that volunteers, so having a friendly visitor or having a visitor come in. Specifically, I know one lady and they have a bridge program. And so there's volunteers that come in and they play bridge together because there wasn't any other bridge players in their home. Behavior Supports Ontario is a provincial program. And so no matter where you are in the province, you should have a behavior lead or a behavior resource that you can reach out to. And they can also give you some supports about external resources. So I fall under that Behavior Supports Ontario umbrella. So again, that could be your geriatric mental outreach team. It could also be your psychiatrist. So any of those supports, for sure, you can tap into. Even thinking about music therapy, participating in a music therapy program in your home, or just different music programs that are available. I know we talked a little bit about art therapy as well. You know, seeing if those are available or you could make them available. And then other community supports. There are many community supports. And I think the pandemic, that actually was one good thing that came out of the pandemic, is that they did put a lot more virtual counseling supports to make available all over Ontario, so that you weren't having to travel to go for different therapies. So that is available for sure. Any other supports that anyone else can think of or that they have in their home? Oh, we're on 2:59.
Yeah.
we don't have much time, and I know that there's a couple people on this call that have to go off to another call. So Gail, thank you. If you do have to run, it's okay. But for those that can stay on, we'll probably be about 5 more minutes, if that's okay.
I can give you 5 minutes.
Okay, perfect.
Well, I'll just kind of close out here by saying I hope one day that we don't have to talk separately about mental health and physical health, and it rather just be health, that it all falls under one umbrella, and that we can just talk openly and feel comfortable about talking about our mental health as much as we do about talking about our physical health.
So to continue the conversation, the Ministry of Long-Term Care has committed to helping residents improve mental wellness through the Resident Health and Wellbeing Program. So that is a program you guys might want to be asking your friends about, and asking your Residents Council to invite your home administrator to attend a council meeting to review how the home is using that RHWB funding and how they've implemented that into your home. And also ask your recreation manager or your social worker to go over wellness supports that are available to you in your home. I know we mentioned a bunch of those, but those are that could be in your home, that might be available. So find out what is available in your home, and also ask if you do want something to become available, that you have that opportunity to do that through your residence councils. And if you have any more questions about mental health and the supports available to you, connect with a trusted team member, because as we keep saying, it really starts with asking for help. And OARC, we've created a mental health fact sheet. And as you can see, these two parts are linked in blue and underlined. They're actually links to the documents, and we will be emailing those who've registered those links, as well as some resources. And then also there was a question if the webinar is recorded. It is recorded and it will be available on our website as well. So I just wanted to reiterate that. And we were going to be able to have some questions, but unfortunately our time is up. But before I go on to the questions, Gail, would you like to talk about another resource that we have?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much. Excuse me. The OARC has created a resident forum. This is a Zoom call once a week on Thursdays at 2 o'clock. It is a forum for residents by residents. So what I mean by that is that it is simply a coming together space where there's no recording, there's no oversight, there's no people hanging out in the background that are taking notes. It's just residents coming together to talk about whatever it is you'd like to talk about. So, you know, to connect it to mental health, if there's some stuff that's bothering you, if there's some stuff that challenges that you're having, sometimes talking about it in a safe place is something that might be helpful to you. You might find that there are other people who have faced the same challenge or are facing the same challenge. And sometimes, you know, there's solutions that you can gain off of each other, or sometimes it's just really nice to get it off your chest. Whatever it is that you want to talk about at the resident forums, Thursdays at 2 o'clock. It's open to any resident in Ontario. And I think the link for the resident forum is sent out, emailed out on a weekly basis. If not, perhaps we can have it attached to the end of this webinar. So everyone's invited to attend. Come and check us out, see if you like it. You don't have to stay. There's no commitment. Drop in whenever you like. Stay as often as you want.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gail. And the last slide is just me, really. I want to thank Jennifer Blaik for being here with us, and Deborah and Gail and Dave for being here today to really talk about, this is such an important topic, and for being open and real with us about your experiences living in long-term care. It was a very powerful conversation, and we thank you for being here. Last year, OARC did a province-wide survey to capture the voices of residents living in long-term care homes. And one of the findings that we found out of that was that residents want to learn more about mental health. And the questions that came in from those of you who joined us in this webinar attest to that sentiment and the topics that you want to learn about, because we got so many questions about so many different topics on mental health. And so we really hope that this webinar is a beginning of a conversation for you to go back to your homes and continue in your homes with your team members, in your residence councils, with families and friends. Use this opportunity to really start maybe some learning circles in your homes to talk about these topics in more depth. Bring in experts to learn more about the things you want to learn about, and how can you support one another in your homes. Using your residence councils as a place to be able to have those asks, and also to create those spaces. We've also put some phone numbers on this slide for you to, if you feel that you aren't getting the support that you need, please reach out to these crisis support lines. And the more of our stories that we tell, you've heard a lot of stories today, and really the more that we tell, the more we understand. And the more we understand, the more of the barriers are broken, And the more barriers that we're able to break is the more we're able to get the help that we need. And really don't hesitate to connect with someone. I've said it twice already, and I'm going to say it again. It does start with asking for help. So thank you. I really appreciate you all joining us today. And I hope that you have a great day.